like I always say about my channel, you can do it however you want. This is how I do it, and this is the way I prefer it. So. Hey guys, welcome back to the JPM Performance channel. Today we have a special video per request of viewers. We're going to do a shop equipment tour. Talk about the different equipment that I have in the shop, what I use it for, some little tips about each little piece if I come up with something as we go. So we're just going to kind of go through the shop and talk about everything that I've got and go through. So we're going to start right here. I know we start our shop tours in this exact same place, but this is also a good place to start for our equipment. So we're going to start with the solvent tank. So you can see that my solvent tank is quite a bit larger than some of the ones that you see. Most of them are only about this big. This one you can fit a lot bigger pieces in, whether you're cleaning. I don't really use this for engine blocks, but you know, larger cylinder heads, obviously any, this is mainly used for getting oil and grease. You know, this is like the first step to a good cleaning. So one of the things that I'm pretty diligent about is making sure that I have good solvent. So if you're ever wondering what good solvent is, you see how clear this is? You go into some shops and their solvent is actually black. What that means is it's really contaminated with oil and grease. And if you have solvent that you're trying to clean oily and greasy parts that's already oily and greasy, it's not going to do as good a job. So I clean this out. You know, this is something I use almost every day. So I clean it out a couple times a year and replace the solvent and clean it all out and kind of go from there. So from there, I kind of let everything drip dry and wash off. And what I've come up with is, and a lot of this stuff you guys are going to see is kind of my own idea and my own design of what I like to do, but I've got hot water plumbed into this hose, and I can rinse things off over here in the ultrasonic cleaner, or I can rinse things off here in the, the sink, and I just keep it right here, and it's plumbed into my hot water heater. I just have a instant on hot water heater. This is just a little 4-gallon. It seems to work enough for me. You couldn't, obviously fill up a 5-gallon bucket of hot water, but it's perfect for washing your hands and keeping hot water for my hose. So generally, after I kind of have things rinsed off, this is an ultrasonic cleaner. So I keep it at 140 degrees. So obviously you could get burned very easily with this water. But what this does is this can clean in places that you can't get to. So I can put full cylinder heads in here, and because it's an ultrasonic cleaner, all of this solution, which is just, it's like a soap and water. It's all it is. But the ultrasonic waves can go inside where you actually can't clean, and the waves will literally clean out the inside. It's something I literally use this for every single component that goes into one of my engines. And it microscopically cleans components really, really well. Then you rinse them off, you blow them off, you're good to go. So that's that. Another tool that I use all the time sits right here on this bench, and this is for disassembling cylinder heads, especially overhead cams. So you can have a cylinder head sitting here, and then you can actually get into, this goes right down into where your valve spring sits. So it's really easy to disassemble a cylinder head. Otherwise, you've probably seen those ones that, you clamp and you've got your head sitting here and it's not stable, and you have to clamp it over and kind of try and get your keepers in and out. This is a really nice tool. Comes from Goodson. Not cheap, but nothing good really is, right? Another tool that I use a lot of, especially considering that I do a lot of these differentials and things like that, is a good press. And one of the things that, it was actually David Stripmatter, he suggested that I get this jack that I can plug into air. This has been a lifesaver. Instead of constantly all day, every day, I probably wasted 20 years of my life doing that, and this thing just goes. So obviously this moves up and down. I've got a bunch of tools, adapters and different pieces, so I can press things on and off. Super important in your shop as well. The other thing is tools, right? So for those of you guys that have watched my shop tours, you know that I try to be a very organized person. Organization is not just, knowing where things are at, but when I open up a drawer in my toolbox, I would literally want to be able to grab my 1/2-inch wrench right now. I don't want to be digging through piles of garbage, right? So I'm very diligent about having a toolbox where everything is organized. I can find it. There is no chaos. Everything is in its place, and that's time. And in a shop, time is money, right? So you'll probably hear me talk a lot about organization because it's kind of one of my pet peeves, but that includes your toolbox, super important. You can see I've got a carp in the air right now, and I'm using this, and I just got this from Harbor Freight. Literally, this thing is 15 years old, but this is a 25-gallon oil lift, and I can change oil, and then when I'm all done, I can hook up a hose, an air hose to this, and I can pump it into my 55-gallon drum before it goes off to recycling. So this has been a really good tool over the years. Something, if you have a lift, you're going to want one of these. This is a life changer. Another really important thing to a shop that does anything. It doesn't matter if you're beating beat or if you're trying to just hold something steady, but you need a big vise. And this vise is attached to, you can see here, this little contraption. It kind of looks funny, but if I'm really yanking on something, this vise will move because my shop floors are super clean. So I can slide my forklift into these mounts down here and hold this vise super steady if I'm using something like this, a cheater bar, where I'm, this is how you break your tools, by, putting big cheater bars on them. But if you're really trying to get something loose, you need a good vise to hold it tight. This is a Wilton vise. They're not real cheap, but this is also something I use pretty much every day. Another piece of equipment that I've only had for a couple years, I wish I've had it for about 15. If you've been watching my shop tours, you know I talked about this, but this is a transmission jack. And this literally will save your back so your back is not in my shape. So a really nice transmission jack moves around. I can slide it underneath instead of just manually, hoisting out transmissions. This does the job for me. So super, super important. I also have this stand that I can roll up and down just if I'm changing a transmission mount, or I'll use it sometimes to brace a differential. This thing obviously goes way up and down. You can stick it under a car and hold things to be safe. And honestly, another point I'd like to point out is if you have a lift, be safe. Nobody wants to see you get hurt because you didn't get the car up or you were trying to use a pipe to hold something rather than a proper tool like this. So keep that in mind. Now, we're going to go back along the back wall here. So the heart of any shop, in my opinion, is the air compressor. I have a really nice air compressor, and it can provide me with 150 psi of air no matter what I'm using in the shop. It can keep up. So in a professional shop, you need a really good air compressor. There's a couple things about this one that I've got. So I've got it stuck back here. You can see I'm kind of in this little alleyway, right? I've kind of got it stuck back here for a couple of reasons: to get it out of the way, and also it suppresses some of the noise from the main part of the shop because it's back in this corner. So that helps, it's not so noisy. This is a 5 horsepower ball door motor. This whole setup, I've had this, as long as I've been in business, and get the biggest possible tank that you can afford with a nice motor like this. So you see the oilless compressors. If you've ever been around one, they are loud and obnoxious. So this is a 5 horsepower engine, and it runs the dual piston pump over here, and this can keep up no matter what I've got going on. So a couple of other things that I came up with. You can see I've got this, so the air comes out of here. Now I shut off my air every night with this valve, because if I was to leave it on and I was gone for the night and I had a line bust, your air compressor is going to run all night, literally, and it could burn it up. You know, they're not designed to run 24/7 nonstop. So I always shut this off. But you can see this. I made this S pattern that goes, you know, out of the compressor, makes these S's, comes all the way up to here. You can see it's a little dirty back here because, you know, I never come back here much. But it makes all these S's and it comes up here into my water separator. So my theory on this was I'm letting gravity help me keep the moisture down low. So the air has to travel this whole distance. And you know what? Maybe you think this is nonsense, but I can tell you I do not get a lot of moisture into my separator, and my compressor runs a lot during the day. And when a compressor runs a lot, it gets hot, and hot breeds moisture, right? So this system has kept a lot of the moisture drained back down into the tank. Now I also have a valve. You can see the hose coming off, and I drain the water into this bucket about once a week. And honestly, I really don't get much. So I've got my little S system. I've got my dryer. I used this PVC pipe, which is rated for like 300 PSI. Some people think I'm crazy to have plastic pipe as my air, but it is so easy to use, so easy to put up into the shop. And it's lasted now for 12 years in this shop, so it's doing really well. All right, let's move our way down. So this is a glass bead cabinet. So again, like my solvent tank, I bought a big one. And that way I can fit large pieces in here. So if you don't know what a glass bead cabinet is, there's actually, yes, glass. This is glass that goes in here, just small little beads. And you can use this to remove rust, corrosion, pretty much anything. Now, one thing to note is if you use your glass bead cabinet, whatever it is, you're going to need to clean it afterwards because these little glass beads get literally everywhere. Really kind of messy. You can see how messy I'm getting just being back here in this corner because this is kind of my dirty area, right? A good set of torches is always a good idea. Kind of like I was mentioning with the vise, the old heat and beat. Sometimes you have no other choice. Doesn't matter how hard you hit it, no matter how much pressure you put on it. Oftentimes you need to heat it up to get it to come loose. So got a nice set of torches sitting here. I just keep them refilled as needed. So Amco brake lathe. Man, I used to use this a lot more than I do now. It's kind of become, you know, back in the old days, all we ever did was if your rotors got warped, we would take them off the car. I would actually use the glass beater, get all the corrosion off the faces of the hat where it goes up against your hub, and you can machine your rotors back straight again. As time has gone on, mechanics have turned over to just replacing rotors. However, in a racing application, we tend to warp them really quickly because of the heat and abuse that we put them through. So if you don't want to change your rotors constantly, you can very easily, you know, I charge 20 bucks to machine a rotor. Most rotors these days range between 50 and 100, even more dollars for a rotor. So you can true it up, make it straight again, and move on with your life. So moving on down, we move into the tire mounting and balancing area. So you see I've got a pretty good area right here where I can use get the tires mounted, roll them over here, have some room, and go to the tire balancer. I have this equipment for a couple different reasons. You know, I don't do a lot of streetcar work, but I also am very diligent about wanting to mount and balance my race tires myself. A lot of that has to do with the control freak that I am, knowing that I have done it right and that it's balanced right. So what I've got here is a Coates direct drive computer balancer. This will do literally any size wheel and tire. I haven't found one yet really that I haven't been able to do. Anything from tiny little Spec Miata tires up to GT1, you know, Trans Am big tires. And speaking of the Trans Am stuff, before we move on here, so lead weights are what we use a lot on the race cars, right? And I'll tell you what, lead weights are getting expensive, but I've got a bunch of just universal lead weights, and these are for steel wheels, which we don't see as much anymore. but also I've got an assortment of wheel weights for different wheels. All modern cars come with alloy wheels. In every one of the lips that you put a weight on is a different shape. So you've got all these different colors which correlate to different makes and models, and you can look this up and find the correct wheel weight that will fit your alloy wheel. So that's what those are for. Now this is one of my prized possessions. You can't buy these anymore. This is a Hunter TC 3500. This is exactly what the Hoosier guys use at the racetrack, and they are always looking for these. The reason that these are so popular, as you can see, it's got these rubber pads. I can put a wheel on here no matter what size it is, and this will push out against the inside of the wheel without grabbing the rim, without marring and scarring your wheel. And I can literally get this over just about any size tire and wheel combination. It also has a really nice bead breaker. Sometimes you run into a situation where you can't get the wheel on, you can't get the tire on, you can't get the tire off. It's just a real pain. So this little side piece is worth its weight in gold, and obviously the bead breaker right here on the side. So this is where I do all the tire stuff, and I kind of, as you can tell, I kind of keep things in an order of dirtiness, right? So we started down there at the compressor and the glass beater. Brake lathe is kind of dirty. You know, mounting tires can be kind of dirty, but it all kind of flows together, I think. So anyway, like I always say about my channel, you can do it however you want. This is how I do it, and this is the way I prefer it. So moving this way, what I've got here is just a very simple lathe. This is not a fancy lathe. I have often felt that sometimes I could use a much better lathe than this, but it does work pretty good for machining tiny little parts. If I ever need to, I make all sorts of little bits and pieces for these different engines. Just, you know, and if you don't have something like this, you can't make it, and it's just such a pain to not have the piece of equipment. So this has been a really good piece to have over the years. And then we continue our dirtiness, right? So we've got a bench grinder here. This is a tungsten grinder that I use to prep, obviously, the tungsten for the TIG welder. This comes from Eastwood, and you can get a proper grind on the tip. Super important for good TIG welds. So I just keep this laying here. You can see I've got just a, this is actually, I need to upgrade this. This is just a regular bench grinder. Not a lot of power, only 3/4 horsepower. I've been wanting to buy one that's about 1.5 horsepower, which may not seem like much, but it's double what this thing's got. So, and so here's my welding bench. So I've got a number of different things going on here. You can see I've got both welders grounded to the table, which means I can, if I'm welding something steel, you don't always have to, especially if you're MIG welding, you don't always have to clamp onto the piece that you're welding if you're grounded through a welding table. Depending on what I'm welding, if it's sitting on here, it'll just ground through the table. But I've got a multitude of different clamps back here, things to hold things in place, magnets, things like that. And then, so here are my welders. So my TIG welders, these are both Millers. The TIG welder's a Syncrowave 200. The Miller's a Millermatic 210. You can see that they're separate, and I can roll them around the shop as needed. But I also keep different gloves even. Why do I have different gloves? Because mainly MIG welding is much dirtier than TIG welding. So I use these just for TIG welding. You can see they're in much better shape than these gloves that I use for MIG welding, which they get hot, they shrink, your hands just, I kind of cycle things through. So if I ever get, you know, to the point where these gloves are worn out, or I feel like they're worn out, I'll throw these away and I'll move my gloves down the line, and I'll get a new set for TIG welding. I even have different helmets for welding. This is my newer helmet, which means the face is in much better shape, and I can use this for TIG welding. This is my older helmet that I use just for MIG welding because it takes so much more abuse. So I've got everything kind of lined up here. For some reason, the gas is on the MIG welder. That's weird. Always turn your gas off, because if you get a little leak, you can lose your entire bottle of gas just like that, and you just wasted a couple $100. So tip of the day, turn your gas off on your welder. Seems obvious. I don't know why mine was on. Okay, moving on. This is a chop saw. This is not something I use very often. I used to use it to cut braided line. If you've ever used a chop saw, you know that they're stinky, smoky, smelly, stinks up the whole shop, ought to be used outside. But the other thing this thing will do, if you have something big that you're cutting through, no matter what it is, this chop saw will cut through pretty much anything. So I don't use it often just because of what it is. It's a little primitive, but you never know when you might need something like that. So moving on, drill press. So this is a jet drill press. I would probably put the jet stuff, you know, mid-grade, mid to upper maybe a little bit as far as quality. It's much better than what you would buy at, you know, like a Harbor Freight or whatever. You can see I've got a piece of wood. If I'm drilling into something and I don't have room, you don't always want to have to move your table. I'll just have this here and put a piece of metal on it or whatever I'm drilling, and it drills right into the wood and keeps my plate nice and clean. So that's obviously super important, just a drill press, right? No big deal. Another important piece, a sander. You can use this for anything, literally. I use it to deburr edges of something I've cut. If you cut off a bolt or anything, they always leave a sharp edge. You can just very easily deburr that. Works great. Belt sander like this is something I would think that is very, very important to your shop as well. Okay, this is kind of my cutting area down here. So this is a Femi saw. I've had this saw for a long time. These things are awesome. I can literally cut different angles with it. This is kind of what I use for cutting off basically anything. It cuts straight. You don't have to worry about your saw going at an angle. This is a Femi NG120. And you can see I've just got a multitude of different steel hanging around here, some extra exhaust tubing for, you know, you never know what you might need, or it's just left over from a project. So this is kind of where I do that. Now, this is really my newest tool that I've bought in the last year or so. This is a jigsaw, and I can cut literally anything with this. If you're doing small detailed work, you can get this thing rolling and just slide through. You can see I've got my own set of glasses and my own set of gloves to try and be safe here. And you can cut literally anything. I can cut angles, I can cut corners, round pieces. Really, really cool piece for cutting, you know, even if you're just cutting a piece of steel like this, I can just slide this on here and cut through basically anything. That has been a nice addition to the shop. Always trying to get like better tools that make my life easier, make the job go quicker, and that saves the customer money. So that's a good thing. Okay, so now we're going to make the turn. We have made it to this corner of the shop. On the other end, well, obviously, was the compressor. Now we're going to turn into what I call my metalworking area. Normally, I have this stuff kind of packed together here in the corner until I need it, but everything's on wheels, as you can see. Even my Beverly shear here, you can see this little stand that I made. They don't come with stands for these things, so you know, when you've got old Miata parts lying around, so I've got an old Miata block and a couple of old Miata crankshafts that I welded all together, and I made this nice little shear. So this is by far one of the best things you can have if you're just doing rough cutting or anything like that. As you can see, I can cut through, I mainly use it for aluminum, but this thing will also cut some really nice angles. And I can literally make any shape that I want with this little Beverly shear. This is a must-have thing for me. If you're doing any kind of metal work with aluminum, this is a good, really good starter piece to start building upon. And then we get into some of the more intricate pieces. So this is a shrinker stretcher. What in the world does that mean? If I've got a piece of aluminum that has a 90-degree angle on it, I can put it, this is the stretcher side. It will stretch that aluminum, and I can literally make a U out of it. I use this a lot for making under trays for race cars. If I'm trying to trace the line of the nose of a race car, I can stretch this or shrink it, as it were, in that case, and that would be this side. So here's the shrinking side. So I can expand it or shrink it either way. This is, most of this kind of equipment that I have comes from Mittler Brothers, which in my opinion is literally like one of the best companies that you can get, that you can use for buying this kind of equipment. You're going to see more Mittler Brothers stuff here next, but shrinker stretcher, not something I use a lot of, but when you need it, once again, there's no other way to do it except for having a tool like this. Now, the most versatile tool that I've got when it comes to the Mittler Brothers stuff is this. And you can call this whatever you want. I don't really remember what they call it, but I can put in a piece of aluminum this deep into this throat. You can see currently I have a set of bead rollers on it. So I can make beads into aluminum that look like this. You can see I've got a little bit of a sample piece here. You can see what this does. And the reason we do that is to make this panel much more stiff. Panels like this on race cars tend to rattle a lot. And if you put some beads into it, you won't have that problem. But look at all of the different dies that I've got. So there's a million different things I can do. I can make a 90-degree bend there. I can make a really sharp one there. I've got a flange tool. If you have two panels coming together, instead of just overlapping them, I can use this flange like this, and that way it actually sits flush. Things like that. This is what they call a spoiler roller. You can make a nice curved end. I can shear. I can do, there's all these different attachments you can get for these. And it's a super important tool for making custom aluminum pieces. So speaking of custom aluminum pieces, some of the basic things that you need to do sometimes is to, just bend something 90 degrees. This is actually something that John gave me a long time ago. And I use this for just bending pieces of aluminum, making any degree I want. It's very universal, just a simple break is what they're called. So when I've got something a little more complicated, I use this. This is also a break, but it's also a shear. It's got a shear section in the bottom. This is a 4-footer. I can also bend smaller pieces. I can move these around and put them together. It's also got a roller on the top, which will take a panel and put a curve to it, depending on how much I turn these down. So this has been a really important piece of equipment to have as well. If you're doing large sheets of aluminum, it does not shear steel, but I don't really make stuff out of steel when it comes to panels because it's obviously too heavy. That's why we don't use it. So a couple more pieces. I put this out here just because it's something that I have found that actually works really well. I got this at Harbor Freight. And for instance, I'm getting ready to pull the engine out of that MX-5 and I like to drop them out of the bottom. I can put this up right up against the bottom of the engine and subframe, take out the subframe bolts and literally drop the entire motor and transmission right onto this, and it goes up and down really easily. It's just got a foot pumper to go up and down. This thing was like $150 at Harbor Freight, and it's really high quality. Joe McClugan actually turned me on to one of these, and it's been a really good tool to have. So I use it for everything. If you just need an extra little bench, you can roll it around to the shop, wherever you're at, and pump it up and put it at bench height. Pretty cool. So the last couple pieces that we'll talk about are what I use to make roll cages. I used to have a manual bender, with what am I trying to say? Just a manual press to bend pipes. And then I got this air over hydraulic bender. This thing has been a lifesaver. So you can literally, I've got different dies, different size. I only have 1.5 and 1 3/4 because that's what I mainly make roll cages out of in diameter. But you can see it's got a nice degree wheel here, tells you how far you've bent. You've got offsets to where you can use different dies to make them tighter or smaller bends. I keep a couple of angle finders over here just to kind of, obviously if you're gonna have bends that look like this in your roll cage, you better have a good mandrel bender for this kind of piping. obviously it'd be tough to bend by hand anyway. The next really cool piece also comes from Mittler Brothers, and that is this notcher. So look at the teeth on this thing. This I can move any angle I want by simply moving the vise, and I can change and I can notch a tube. What is notching a tube? Notching a tube is making it fit properly. So this is a little bit of a, what do they call this thing? Called a pipe master. Anyway, I can put this up against an angle and figure out what angle I'm looking for. An 1.5-inch tube fits right through here, and I can figure out the angle that I'm looking for and come over to here and get the right angle, which is another little tricky piece for building roll cages. But what you're looking for is, if I've got an 1.5-inch pipe meeting an 1.5-inch pipe, we're not looking for gaps. We want to be able to weld these pipes when they're butted together. This creates the notch to where it fits properly. So this is another must-have piece for a really good roll cage. Once again, I used to have a notcher that you just put in the drill press, and it used a hole saw. Down it'd go, right? This is way nicer. And then obviously when I make my notch, I go over to the belt sander and deburr everything. So that's kind of what we've got. I mean, I've got a couple of other things in the shop, of course. If you're going to be shipping engines all over the country, you need to have a forklift. This one's been good simply because it's so small and low profile, but it'll still lift 2,500 pounds. And I can use it for, you know, moving. As you can see, I've got fuel barrels over here. It'll pick all that stuff up. Obviously, if you're ever working on cars, you're going to use an engine hoist like this to pull engines in and out. This load leveler is something that I think is a must-have piece. I can change the angle of the engine. If you're dipping it into an engine compartment, you need to change the angle as you're going in. This will adjust that. Really, really, really helps. So looking good there. And honestly, that's about it. I mean, besides some of the teeny tiny little hand tools that we've got that we use now and then, but that's the major tour of the equipment at the JPM shop. So hope this has been of some interest to you guys. If you have any questions about any of the things that you've seen, just hit me up down below, and I'm happy to answer about, you know, more details about any of the equipment that you saw and go through there. But that's how I build. Having the right equipment enables you to build a proper race car or go-kart for your kid or whatever you're into, right? Equipment is key, and then knowing how to use it is the next one. Appreciate you guys watching. Like I said, hit me up below if you have any questions. I'll answer anything that you might be interested in, and hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Thanks for watching. Take care.